Welcome back to another episode on the Binturong Horror Channel. Last week I was off for what was supposed to be a camping trip in the quiet island of Lombok in Indonesia, but a chance encounter with Jane changed my plans. Her story of an experience while camping in Lombok in the early 90s is one of the most direct encounters you'll hear of the supernatural. This is entry 212. Call of the Sea. In the dense, oppressive heat of a Singapore summer, Jane packed her suitcase with an urgency born of desperation. Her everyday life as a university student was consumed by a relentless schedule, her mind cluttered with deadlines and exams. She loved her field of study, sound engineering, but at times, the rigor of the course took the joy out of it. Lombok, Indonesia promised an escape to serenity, a remote campground nestled where lush jungle kissed pristine beaches, far from the ceaseless hum of urban existence. Upon arrival, the rustic charm of the campsite was instantly calming. It was a small collection of tents and makeshift shelters scattered around a clearing that opened into a broad sandy beach. The ocean stretched out, vast and inviting, a constant soothing murmur of waves mingling with the breeze. The other campers, a retired Australian couple, a solitary German backpacker named Kurt, and Arjun, a local guide with an encyclopedic knowledge of the island's lore, greeted her warmly. Her first few days passed in a blissful blur of sunbathing, reading, long walks along the shore. The stark contrast between Lombok's tranquil landscape and Singapore's bustling streets was therapeutic. Rediscovering her passion for sound, she sampled ambient sounds from the jungle and the beach. As night fell, the campsite would come alive in a different way, with stories shared over the flicker of a campfire. Arjun, with his deep, resonant voice, became the group's storyteller, weaving tales of the island's spirits and history into the starlit evenings. One night, however, was markedly different. It was a night when the sky was exceptionally clear. The ocean whispered louder than usual, and a full moon cast a silver glow over everything, turning the sea into a mirror of light. That night, Jane awoke suddenly, her heart pounding without reason. From somewhere out in the vast, dark ocean, she heard a voice, soft and melodious, calling her name. It seemed woven into the sounds of the waves, a part of the sea itself. Sitting up in her tent, Jane listened intently, but the voice faded as quickly as it had come. Convinced she dreamt it, she eventually fell back into a restless sleep. The next morning, over a communal breakfast of tropical fruits and strong coffee, Jane shared her experience. Her voice was hesitant at first, but curiosity overcame her embarrassment. Arjun listened with a grave expression before sharing a piece of local folklore. He spoke of sea people and the realm of spirits from Indonesian mythology, people who lived in the waters around the islands. They were governed by the queen of the southern sea, Nyi Roro Kidul. The tragic story of the queen dates back centuries and often features a beautiful princess cursed to become covered in boils. She was eventually cured by the sea and lived on as its queen, taking control of its supernatural realm. It is known that these creatures sometimes reach out to the living, especially under the full moon, when the veil between the worlds is thinnest. His story filled Jane's day with a mixture of dread and wonder. That evening, under the same full moon, driven by a blend of fear and fascination, she decided to walk along the beach. The world was bathed in moonlight, transforming the familiar into something ethereal. As she strolled, a figure appeared in the distance, a girl, walking slowly towards the sea. There was something eerily familiar about her. Jane called out, but there was no response. The girl continued her march into the waves, unheeding. As Jane squinted against the bright moonlight, her heart skipped a beat. The girl looked exactly like her. Paralyzed with fear, Jane tried to move, to run towards her doppelganger, but her feet were suddenly rooted to the cold, wet sand. Out at sea, a darker shape seemed to wait. A figure, human in form, but blurred out by the water. It was as if the sea itself beckoned. Jane's doppelganger was quickly reaching the figure. Jane could only scream into the night. As her screams gave way to a hoarse cry, a horrible realization dawned on Jane. She couldn't be seen. She couldn't be heard. Only because she was the doppelganger, and the girl on the beach, the one that was walking towards the ocean depths, was the real Jane. As the terror set in, Jane noticed the glistening figure in the water shift its gaze directly towards her. For a moment, its blank stare seemed to absorb the moonlight instead of reflecting it. From a distance, Kurt, who happened to be taking a night stroll of his own, watched curiously as Jane walked towards the sea. When she kept walking in spite of his repeated calls, he rushed towards her, his steps hastened by the urgent beating of his heart. He found Jane waist deep in the sea, staring out at it as if mesmerized by the moon's reflection. Beside her floated a white figure, barely visible, like a wisp of sea foam shaped in a human form. The sight chilled him, but driven by a protective impulse, he reached out and grabbed Jane's shoulder. She turned, her eyes wide and vacant, as if she had been dragged back from a distant dream. In her hand, she clutched tightly the edges of her rosary beads, which had pierced her palm, blood mingling with the salt water. Kurt, shaken, guided her back to the shore, glancing over his shoulder at the empty sea that had moments ago seemed to cradle another presence. The implications of this experience weighed heavily on Jane. She spent the remainder of her time at the campsite grappling with a mix of fear and an almost irresistible pull to the sea. The ocean, which had once been a source of peace, now felt like a living, breathing entity with its own desires and intentions. Jane felt its eyes upon her every time she neared the water, a silent call that was both seductive and terrifying. As her departure approached, Jane's feelings morphed into a resolve to never let herself be so vulnerable again. She was determined to return to her life in Singapore, to the safety of academia and concrete, where the sea could not reach her. On her last evening, she stood at the edge of the camp, looking out over the water. The sunset painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, a beautiful but haunting reminder of the night when the boundary between her world and that of the sea had thinned. Back in Singapore, Jane found herself unable to shake the memory of that night. It lingered in her dreams, a recurring vision of the walking into the sea and becoming part of its depths. Then, one night, about a week after returning home, Jane discovered that some of her recording equipment that she had used on the trip had in fact recorded audio from the night of the incident. As she played it back, her mind was transported to those chilling moments. She heard the crashing of waves, the gentle sea winds, then Kurt's voice calling out to her, splashes of him running into the water. Then, as the clip was ending, she heard it. Soft as a whisper, but undeniable. A voice that seemed to blend with the rhythm of the sea. It took about an hour to transfer the file over and finally enhance it. When she did, it was a single word being repeated. Ashmakam. It took 2 days for Jane to meet a professor who had enough experience in ancient languages to help her. Ashmakam, he explained slowly, means ours in Sanskrit. It's a possessive, a claim. Jane listened, a chill running down her spine. The spirits of the sea had called to her, and in some unfathomable way, they had claimed her as one of their own. Her march into the sea, an eerie spectral claim, was a stark manifestation of this otherworldly possession. The revelation of the word Ashmakam suggested that the spirits did not merely contact her, they had marked her as part of their domain. Despite her resolve, the call of the sea remained a potent undercurrent in her life. Jane avoided traveling to coastal areas, fearing what might happen if she heard the sea call her name again. She surrounded herself with the urban landscape of Singapore, its skyscrapers like protective barriers against the pull of the ocean, and eventually she moved to Riyadh, far from the sea. Still, years later, Jane would occasionally feel the chill of the word Ashmakam, whispered by an unseen breeze.